This week is National Suicide Prevention Week, a solemn reminder that suicide is the leading cause of death for those 15 to 24 years old. Joining us now on the program to talk about the signs and symptoms, as well as what the community can do to prevent suicide, is Carrie Krawiec, a therapist at the Birmingham Maple Clinic. Carrie, appreciate you joining us.
Absolutely. Good morning.
Good morning to you as well. Appreciate having you on. So, of course, this week is a stark reminder that young people are the category demographic that is most at risk for suicide. It's the leading cause of death among those 15 to 24 years old. Just how long has that been the case where suicide has been such a prevalent cause of death in this young age group?
Gosh, I really can't speak to how long that's been the case, but it has been some time. And of course, more and more often, we are hearing reports of children plagued by suicide. I think the demands of being a young adult or teen right now are really high. I think the advent of social media and other forms of phones and texting means there's really no space between your life at school and your life at home. So whatever pressures you're feeling in terms of either being bullied or comparing yourself and not measuring up, the things that feel to a young person is very insurmountable, are surrounding you at all times.
Does that youth and still that sort of plasticity to their development in their brain, does that play a role in them being more susceptible, people in this age group being more susceptible to suicidal tendencies or taking the act themselves?
Sure. I'm not exactly sure what the science says with regards to that, but we can assume that impulsivity and recklessness are, of course, higher. Not a full understanding of consequences, and not a full understanding of ability and ability to overcome obstacles, to develop pride. So I think that you probably would see it more in relation to certain features of that age. And then again, the certain demands or experiences of people that age.
We're joined by Carrie Krawiec from the Birmingham Maple Clinic on the Megacast today. More information on the Birmingham Maple Clinic can be found at birminghammaple.com. Birminghammaple.com for more information. Carrie, what are some of the common signs of suicide that we have heard commonly in the past, but even maybe some new ones that may be popping up, may have been popping up in the last few years?
I think the newest ones that are popping up in the last few years are that there are almost no signs, right? That people are very good at concealing themselves. And you look at celebrities that have suicide. Anthony Bourdain comes to mind, Chris Cornell. There are some others who, on the outside, on the surface, looked successful, were doing well. The people who knew them were not indicating anything, and still they were plagued with this. So I think the sort of pressure or burden to look on the surface like everything's fine is a very hard thing for all of us to navigate, which is why it's so important to ask those questions, to develop personal, intimate connections, to say how are things going with you, but then be specific. Like, one thing that some common things, of course, withdrawal from close people, being more isolated, more to yourself, especially for young people, more time in their rooms, less time engaging, with the family or peers. Certainly any increases in drug or alcohol use, any attempts to quit using, but being unsuccessful and finding yourself using again and sort of being in this cycle of disappointment and shame, but also like eating substances to cope. Those things would be sort of obvious indicators that like we need to ask this person. But I think really being bold and saying, do you feel like hurting or harming yourself? Like, do you wish you would die? Asking those questions outright and seeing what kind of answer you get, even if it's just a change in body language, may be very informative.
And so, as you mentioned, there are certain questions that we can ask or we should be asking those that we believe may have suicidal tendencies. And you mentioned one of them, that's just straight outright asking them if they're having any thoughts of harming themselves or taking their own life. What are the other questions that we should be asking? And when should we be asking these questions to someone we're concerned about?
Like, again, I think often if you're concerned about a person, it can change from time to time, especially a person who has depression. And so I think to say, do you have thoughts of hurting or harming yourself? If you do, what are those thoughts? So like, and have you thought about what you would do if you were going to act on this? What would you do? So you're always assessing. So do they have the thoughts? Yes or no? If yes, what would they do? If they've thought of anything they would do, whether realistic or sort of impossible, that's another like level of indication how severe things are. If it's possible, so if they have had the thought, have a plan, and the plan is possible, like they have access to their plan. Because that would be the third question. Do you have access to things that make this plan possible? If you get three yeses, that you need to absolutely go to an emergency room, a trained professional, call 911 for a full evaluation.
In these cases, it can be difficult to kind of navigate these conversations with somebody that's having those tendencies. Maybe they are in denial about those tendencies, at least outwardly, although they know
Mhm.
that they're having them. Or maybe you get to that point where you ask those questions, you are getting those two yeses, three yeses total,
Mhm.
and you are at a point where that concern has been kind of confirmed, and this person that you care about needs to seek some attention. How do you go about taking that next step with that person, because you can't really force anyone to do anything in that regard. You're really trying to help this person help themselves.
Absolutely. I think this is a very important thing too, because often it's young people telling other young people, and then someone else is left with that information, which I say in a lot of ways is like above their education and training. So if you have a teenager, young adult person telling another teenager, young adult person, then saying, don't tell anyone, I told you this. I think the people that are the receivers of that information need to know that that is too much of a burden for them to carry, that they don't have the education, skills, or training to know what to do with that information, and that the absolute best thing they can do is tell another adult or supportive person in that person's life so that they can help that person, even if they've been sworn to secrecy. It's a matter of life and death, and it's really an unfair piece of information for them to hold, and they're really not qualified to hold it.
We're joined by Carrie Krawiec from the Birmingham Maple Clinic. Joining us on today's edition of the Megacast Suicide Prevention Week is September 4th through the 10th. That is this week, of course, in Suicide Prevention Month as well. The leading cause of death for those 15 to 24 years old. Learn more information on suicide, including some more questions or some more sort of examinatory things you can do to kind of look into whether or not somebody you may have concerns about maybe having those suicidal tendencies. You can visit cdc.gov/suicide, cdc.gov/suicide. And if you know someone or you yourself are experiencing a mental health distress or are considering suicide, 988 is a suicide and crisis lifeline. You can call that and also chat at 988lifeline.org. 988lifeline.org. The 988 hotline is confidential, free, and available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Carrie, uh, in terms of what happens after you take that action and you start to help this person, or they're going through kind of working through that situation they're having, their mental health struggles, what more should people be doing at that point? Because there's a lot you can do to help, but there's also a lot that you can do to kind of get in the way and maybe cause some setbacks.
Absolutely. I think, right, like there are things that people do even inadvertently that actually shut down the conversation as opposed to keeping it open. Certainly minimizing someone's experience or saying something along the lines of, oh, look at your life. You have nothing to be upset about. I mean, I think I heard it put so perfectly once. Being depressed or having depression, the disorder, is not about being sad when things are sad. We're all entitled to be sad when things about our life are sad. Being depressed is actually quite the opposite. It's right. It's about being depressed when there isn't really evidence to be depressed, right? And being depressed anyways, right? That is so depressed, the feeling is acceptable, right? When things are upsetting. But being depressed when things are going well is actually quintessentially what makes it a disorder. And so I think people can sometimes say the wrong thing when they say, well, of course you shouldn't be upset, everything is fine. That causes people a lot of shame and anxiety and makes them feel like you don't really understand them.
From a therapist's angle, from a professional's angle, where does that conversation then begin? Those treatments then begin for somebody that is having suicidal tendencies, or even someone that's in treatment after attempting suicide, to address the root issues that led to those ideations or to those actions, and ultimately put them on a safer path and a path to recovery from whatever ailments that they are suffering from.
Sure. So therapists will look to evaluate sort of the biopsychosocial contributors, meaning if there needs to be medication or referral to a psychiatrist would be made. If there's some things about the surrounding environment, if there's a lack of support or a lack of activity or things, then those changes will be made. So there might be medical changes made. There might be some behavioral changes addressed. And there also might be some cognitive changes. Is does the person have parts of their brain or mind that they're able to access, that they're able to use to encourage themselves, that they're able to use to challenge those depressed or negative thoughts? Can they create new neural pathways to sort of change the way they look at their situation or the world around them, or change their own confidence in their ability to handle those things? And right, if there needs to be support of a larger family or system, perhaps group therapy or family therapy, to help a person feel more connected and supported, and to help give the family skills to know what are they doing that maybe is contributing harmfully, or what are they doing that's contributing well, that actually there needs to be more of that done.
BirminghamMaple.com is the website for the Birmingham Maple Clinic. We're joined by one of the therapists, Carrie Krawiec, on today's edition of the Megacast. Of course, September 4th through September 10th is National Suicide Prevention Week. And here in Oakland County later on this month, actually, the county itself, in partnership with the Oakland Community Health Network, is going to be holding a suicide prevention discussion for that's open to the entire community. That's going to be Wednesday, September 28th, 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. at the Oakland Community Health Network's office in Troy. There's also a virtual option available. You can go to oakgov.com to learn more information about that event. And again, that is Wednesday, September 28th, 2022, 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. And it's Suicide Prevention 101 is also going to be another one of their seminars, 5 p.m. until 6 p.m. Carrie, anything else at this time we haven't discussed today on this matter, or other mental health matters that we should be aware of at this time?
Sure. I think, you touched a lot today on what if you're the supportive family member of somebody. And I think that that was such a great piece, because if you aren't sure what to do, even if your friend, loved one, family member won't seek therapy, it's okay for you to seek therapy and get more advice about how to cope with that. Where you're responsible to take care of someone else, and what things you need to let go of, what strategies you have to cope with the anxiety you have about how your other close person is doing, is a really important part of this, that everybody needs to be supported.
And that just prompted something in my mind, Carrie. Before I let you go, I do want to touch also briefly on what to do after the unfortunate scenario where someone in your life has taken their life, has gone through with suicide, because I've experienced that before, and just after graduating high school. And what I struggled with more than anything in that immediate moment after was, well, how do I address this with my mutual friends, with this person, with their family, with their family, and so on. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do in this situation that is that may potentially trigger this person, or may actually be helpful to these people. So, what advice do you have for those that are in someone's life that may take their life, or even just attempt suicide, to help others around them go through the aftermath of that situation?
Sure. Having known someone who's successfully suicided, whether in your family or close loved one, actually puts people at higher risk for suicide and suicidal thoughts themselves. So taking care of yourself is so important. I think of the examples you said is just being honest and authentic. You cannot always control what you will say or won't say, would or wouldn't be triggering to someone else, but being honest. I think avoiding I should have said this, or they should have done that, or I shouldn't have said this. I always say that don't say should. If you acknowledge, if you say something and you're reading another person's feedback and you say, I'm sorry, did that cross the line? Or, this was just my experience, to really sort of take ownership and responsibility for what you're saying, and not allow it for yourself to feel like it is controlling someone else. They have the right to say, hey, this is information I didn't want to know, or I don't want to talk about right now, or excuse me. That if each person sort of allows for that kind of a bounce in the volley, like if you were playing tennis, it doesn't have to just be hard balls back and forth, but it's okay if there's like sort of a little misstep, and then you just make a correction and bounce it back.
Well, Carrie, appreciate your time and appreciate your advice on this issue that is so tough for so many people to navigate, and can be really tough for people to just simply have an informed conversation about. Appreciate it.
I appreciate it too. I think making people more comfortable to have the conversations is the most important step we can take.
Definitely agree. Thank you so much, Carrie.
Thank you.